used to believe that working night shifts was only frightening because of thieves, because of the possibility of stumbling across someone desperate enough to break into the empty places I was paid to guard. Darkness, I thought, had no power on its own. But I was wrong. What unsettled me the most were not the alarms, not the security protocols, not even the silence. It was the undeniable feeling that someone or something was watching me, even when I knew I was alone. People think night guards are simply employees with flashlights and keys, but our job is stranger than that. We are witnesses to the hours when the world seems to forget itself. When the last shopkeeper leaves and the doors are locked, a different city is born. The air grows heavy and the smallest sounds, a shutter creaking, the faint hum of a vending machine, the hiss of pipes cooling, become enormous. Psychologists call it shift work disorder, insomnia, hallucinations, paranoia brought on by a body clock turned inside out. Priests call it the hour of the wolf, the time when faith is weakest, when demons wander more freely. I had heard all the stories before I ever put on the uniform. That guards hear voices in empty corridors, that shadows dart across deserted food courts, that mannequins sometimes shift their stance as though acknowledging your presence. It all sounded like nonsense meant to scare rookies, the kind of folklore every profession invents for itself. Still, in Latin American towns like mine, people cling to older beliefs. That certain spaces carry imprints of human energy, echoes of the living that play back long after closing time. Schools where children's laughter rings out at midnight. Factories where the dead still clock in. Shopping malls where whispers rise like trapped breath in the ventilation. It is easy to laugh in the daylight. But when the clock strikes 2 or 3 in the morning, when your steps echo across the marble floors and you see your own shadow multiply in the glass of empty storefronts, folklore no longer feels like fantasy. It feels like memory, like something you should have respected all along. The church near my childhood home had an old saying, "Never walk through its courtyard at the devil's hour, because saints sleep then and prayers lose their strength." I remember the way my grandmother would cross herself at exactly 3 a.m., whispering "Líbranos del mal." At the time, I thought it was superstition. But when you work the graveyard shift long enough, when you stand watch as the city lies in its supposed safety, you start to sense that those words were not just ritual, they were armor. That night, I did not yet know what waited for me in the photographs I carried in my phone. I only knew the familiar rhythm of my patrol, the parking lots, the escalators, the food court. I knew the silence that thickened like smoke the deeper into the mall I walked. I knew the strange sense of being a trespasser in a place meant for thousands now stripped to emptiness. And I knew, though I tried to deny it, that something was wrong with the way the air pressed against my back, with the way my ears caught whispers no radio could explain. I was not sensitive to these things, or so I thought. But that night was only the beginning. It was a Monday night, the kind of night when the city outside seems half asleep, its traffic dwindling to a faint hum beyond the concrete walls. Inside the shopping mall, silence was absolute. By then I had grown accustomed to it. My patrol always followed the same route. Begin at the parking levels, climb through the central hallways, and finish near the food court on the top floor. The mall was immense, a labyrinth of closed storefronts and mirrored panels reflecting fragments of my own shape. With the shutters rolled down and the music silenced, every step of my boots echoed like a hammer strike. Somewhere far away I could hear the distant whine of a cleaning machine, but otherwise the building was mine alone. Or so I thought. I had already walked past the escalators and was nearing the final stretch of my round when something flickered in the corner of my vision. From the railing above I glimpsed a figure below, small, quick, bent low as if it were a child or a person hunched under too many layers of cloth. The shadow zigzagged down the corridor, darting past the locked glass doors of boutiques. My body reacted before my mind could. I gripped my flashlight tighter and raced down the stairs, my boots pounding against the unlit steps. Training told me to assume it was a thief. That was the logical explanation. Not ghosts, not the stories that the veteran guards laughed about. A thief could be caught, restrained, handed over to police. That was protocol. When I reached the lower floor, the figure was already gone from sight. But I caught one last glimpse, darting into the entrance of a department store, one of the largest in the mall. Its display windows stretched wide across the hallway, filled with mannequins clothed in the season's fashion. The doors were sealed with heavy locks, the shutters pulled down firmly. No sign of tampering, no alarms triggered. I raised my flashlight and swept its beam across the dark interior. The mannequins stood still, their glassy eyes unseeing, their hands frozen in artificial gestures. The racks were orderly, the counters neat. Everything appeared untouched, yet I lingered, convinced I had seen a ripple of movement deep inside, as though something had slid just beyond the range of my light. The emptiness pressed in on me. I circled the storefront, checked the frames, the gates. Nothing. No other entrances, no broken locks. The silence was so complete that even my breathing felt too loud. Still, protocol demanded I document the inspection. I pulled out my phone, aimed the camera at the storefront, and snapped a photo. Locked doors, intact windows, mannequins in their rigid poses. Proof that all was in order. I turned away, my steps heavy as I moved to continue the round. But after only a few paces, a sensation crawled across my shoulders, the prickling weight of being observed. I hadn't heard a sound, but I felt it. Slowly, unwillingly, I pivoted back toward the department store. The mannequins were still there, lined up behind the glass like silent witnesses. I lifted my phone again, more to reassure myself than anything else, and captured a second image before walking on. The rest of the shift passed in uneasy silence. Nothing else stirred. Yet the unease clung to me like a second skin. By dawn, when I sat down with my supervisor to hand over my report, I recounted what I had seen. The running figure, the store, the photographs. He looked skeptical, as though humoring me. That is, until he opened the gallery on my phone. The first image was normal enough. The mannequin stood at attention, stiff and lifeless, eyes fixed forward. But the second photo, the one I had taken only moments later, was not the same. One of the mannequins had turned its head. Its face, pale and blank, was angled directly toward the spot where I had been standing with my phone raised. At first, I didn't notice it. I was too tired, too drained from the long night. My supervisor was the one who pointed it out, tapping the phone screen with a kind of nervous amusement. "Look closely," he said. I leaned in, half expecting him to show me some smudge, a reflection, maybe the flare of my flashlight. But no. There it was, subtle, undeniable. The mannequin that had been facing forward in the first photograph now stood with its head tilted, its featureless eyes directed straight at the camera, straight at me. A chill spilled down my back like ice water. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of angles, a distortion in the glass, a shift of shadows when I moved. But my supervisor zoomed in, and the image grew sharper. The head was turned, the posture altered ever so slightly. It wasn't the work of light or chance. It was deliberate. When the other guards gathered around to see, laughter erupted. One joked that I had staged it with Photoshop, another that I must have been hallucinating from lack of sleep. They mocked me, but their laughter had an edge to it. Beneath the humor, I caught the flicker of unease in their eyes. They had heard the stories too, though most never admitted it aloud. Stories about mannequins that shifted when no one was looking. About shadows caught lingering in shop windows, about voices whispering names that weren't yours. I tried to shake it off, to bury it under protocol and fatigue, but the image clung to me. All that day I replayed the moment in my head. The sense of movement beyond the glass, the silence heavy enough to smother breath, the instinct that something had turned to watch me. Later I thought of older beliefs my grandmother used to tell me. Beliefs I'd dismissed as peasant superstition. She said objects that resembled the human form could draw spirits into them, that dolls, statues, even mannequins could serve as vessels. She spoke of muñecos de sombra, shadow dolls used in old rituals to trap wandering souls. The dead, she told me once, sometimes need a body, even a false one, to remind themselves they once lived. I remembered those words when I looked at the photograph again. The blank face, the stiff arms, the crooked tilt of the head. It wasn't just a mannequin anymore. It was something pretending, something borrowing form. In anthropology, they say modern malls are temples of consumption, shrines to desire where human energy lingers long after the lights go out. If that's true, then perhaps the mannequins are more than decoration. Perhaps they are guardians of that energy or prisoners of it. Perhaps at 2 or 3 in the morning they awaken just enough to acknowledge the intruder walking among them. That night, when I returned for my next shift, I could not step into the corridor without feeling eyes on me. Every window I passed seemed to ripple with silent witnesses, pale faces behind glass, waiting for me to look back. I kept my flashlight low, refusing to shine it directly into the display windows. I told myself it was childish, that I was being superstitious. But deep down I knew there are some things safer left unseen. In a city like mine, people laugh at tales of spirits. But laughter fades in the empty heart of a mall at 3 a.m. There, beneath the weight of silence, the line between myth and memory thins until it vanishes. And once you've felt the gaze of something that should not move, you cannot unfeel it. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see that mannequin's head turning, its faceless stare locking with mine. And I know at that hour, in that place, I was not alone. I thought I had left that mannequin behind me. I thought the worst was over. But fear has a way of following you, and in my family, the night has always had its claws sunk deep. This time it wasn't me. It was my father. He worked as a night watchman too, but not in some polished mall with gleaming floors and climate control. His shift was at a yonky, a sprawling junkyard of cars on the outskirts of the city. The place was a graveyard of metal. Wrecked sedans stacked like tombstones, stripped trucks with hollow frames, rust biting into every surface. By day, scavengers came to haggle over parts. By night, the lot fell silent, nothing but the brittle whisper of wind moving through shattered windows and twisted frames. From the front gate, you could still glimpse civilization, the occasional headlights slicing down the distant highway. But behind the junkyard stretched only emptiness. Dry hills, dirt paths leading nowhere, darkness so complete it felt like a black hole. My father used to say that when he turned his back to the highway, he felt as though the earth had swallowed the world whole, leaving only him, his flashlight, and the cold. He had worked there for years. He knew the sounds that belonged to the place, the tick of cooling metal, the groan of shifting stacks, even the hiss of wind snaking through the carcass of a crushed bus. Those noises didn't scare him. What did scare him were the silences, the moments when even the junkyard held its breath. On winter nights, the air was razor thin and dry, the kind of air that made your bones ache. Around 2:30 one morning, he set out on one of his routine rounds. He rode an old ATV, its engine coughing against the cold, and carried the tools of his trade: a heavy flashlight, a radio, and the wooden baton he kept clipped to his belt. He steered carefully through the narrow aisles of twisted steel, pausing here and there to check the locks, the fences. Then he stopped. The silence was too deep, unnatural. No distant car horns, no animals stirring in the brush, not even the usual groan of rusting metal. Just the dry wind scattering dust across the dirt. He didn't like it. Something about the air pressed against him, urging him to check the perimeter, to see what lay beyond the junkyard's crumbling fence. So he guided the ATV out through the gate and circled around back, where the dirt road stretched into nothingness. It was darker there. The junkyard's lights reached only a few meters into the void. Beyond that, the landscape was swallowed whole. That was when he saw it. A figure. At first he thought it was just a man walking along the dirt path, but the path led nowhere. No villages, no ranches, no houses for miles. Whoever it was, they didn't belong there. The figure shuffled slowly, dragging its feet as if the earth itself resisted each step. Its clothes hung in tatters, so long and frayed that the trousers swept the ground, hiding its feet. The shirt was loose, oversized, drooping from shoulders too thin to hold it up. The hands dangled useless at its sides, skin stretched taut over bone. My father lifted the flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark. "Oiga!" he called. "Hey, what are you doing there?" The man didn't respond, didn't turn, didn't flinch at the sudden glare. He just kept walking, slow and steady, like a sleepwalker with no destination. Again my father shouted, his voice echoing off the silent hills. Still no answer. Just the dragging steps, the soft rasp of cloth against dust. He followed at a distance on the ATV, engine humming low. A thought flickered through his mind. Maybe it was a drunk, someone who had wandered off the highway and gotten lost. That would explain the silence, the unsteady gait. Yes, he told himself, that must be it. But as the man kept moving, never reacting, never acknowledging him, my father's certainty began to crumble. He drew closer, closer still, until he was within reach of the junkyard's cameras. There at least he felt safer. He cut the engine, dismounted, and gripped the baton at his side. The cold was sharp enough to make his hands tremble, but it wasn't just the cold anymore. Something in the air felt wrong. The figure trudged on, unaware, or pretending not to be. My father raised the flashlight again, its beam slicing across the dirt. And then, after what felt like forever, the figure stopped. Slowly, so slowly it began to turn. My father said that in all his years as a watchman, he had never seen anything turn so slowly. It was as if the figure's body resisted the very idea of facing him. Inch by inch, the shoulders pivoted, the neck creaked, and finally the face came into view. Only it was not a face. The skin clung to bone as though it had been baked dry under the desert sun. The cheeks were hollow, the jaw locked in a grimace that was neither a smile nor a scream, but something caught in between. And where the eyes should have been, there was nothing. Just two sunken cavities, dark and depthless, like the sockets of a skull exhumed from shallow earth. The light of his flashlight struck that terrible visage, yet the man did not flinch. Instead, his head tilted ever so slightly, as if studying the living intruder who had dared interrupt his march. My father swore that in that moment the air itself changed. The wind ceased to be mere wind. It howled through the dirt road like breath forced from a buried chest. He stumbled back, his heart thundering, his baton raised as though wood could protect him from something that belonged more to the grave than the night. Step after step he retreated, his boots crunching against gravel until panic broke through his frozen shock. Then he ran. He sprinted to the ATV, leapt onto the seat, and jammed the ignition. The engine roared, tires skidding over stones, the vehicle lurching violently. Twice it nearly overturned, jerking sideways in the uneven path, but he did not stop. Dust exploded beneath the wheels as he fled toward the faint halo of the junkyard's lights. His mind refused to process what he had seen, clinging desperately to the only explanation it could endure. A man, badly injured, in need of help. When he burst through the gates, he slammed them shut behind him and grabbed the radio with trembling hands. His voice cracked as he called the police. He told them there was someone out there on the dirt road, a man disoriented, wounded, in urgent need of assistance. He wanted so badly to believe it was true that he had not just looked into the face of something dead yet walking. Minutes later, a patrol arrived. 2 officers with flashlights and steady voices accompanied him back to the rear of the property. Together they combed the road, their beams cutting into the blackness. They searched for footprints, torn fabric, drops of blood. Anything to prove there had been someone there. But the dirt lay untouched, unmarked. Nothing. Still shaken, my father insisted they check the security footage. The cameras along the perimeter had captured him leaving on his ATV, had recorded his slow approach along the road. The lens showed him dismounting, stepping forward, flashlight in hand. Then it showed him jerking back suddenly, then sprinting, then tearing away on the vehicle in a cloud of dust. But the cameras showed only him. No other figure appeared. No man, no shadow, not even the faint distortion of movement. The police left with an informal report promising to patrol the area over the following nights. They did not say it aloud, but their faces betrayed the same thought. What exactly were they supposed to file? Eyeless corpse walking dirt road. That was no report fit for paper. My father did not sleep the next day. He sat at the table with his head in his hands, replaying the scene again and again, trapped between disbelief and dread. He had faced thieves, drunks, addicts before, but this was different. This was not alive. He said even years later he could still smell it, the scent of dry earth, like a freshly opened grave. And that was the moment, though he didn't yet admit it, when he began to understand. Not everything he had dismissed as rumor was superstition. The night held more than shadows. Much more. For days after the encounter, my father lived in 2 worlds. In one, there was the official record, the grainy footage showing nothing but him walking alone in the darkness, his flashlight beam cutting through empty air. No figure, no shuffling man, no eyeless face. To anyone else, that was proof enough. He had imagined it, or worse, he had lied. But in the other world, the one that pressed on him at night when sleep refused to come, he remembered every detail with unbearable clarity. The way the man's clothes dragged through the dust, the fragile bones of his hands swaying at his sides, the endless slowness of that head turning, until it revealed a hollow gaze that no camera could capture. Cameras can lie, he told me once, but your skin doesn't. His skin had known fear. The police returned a few more times. They scanned the dirt road, searched the brush, even dug shallow pits to make sure there were no hidden graves. In this country, you can never be too sure. Mass graves are a whispered reality. And my father thought perhaps he had seen not a ghost, but a victim. Someone whose body had been buried in the desert, clawing its way back toward recognition. But the searches turned up nothing. No remains, no evidence. Neighbors in the area spoke of older legends, of animas errantes, souls that never received proper burial rites, condemned to wander. Others told of nahuales, men who could slip out of their bodies and roam like shadows, though those tales belonged more to the villages than to the city's edge. Still, the whispers carried weight. Even the skeptical guards who mocked my father's fear grew quiet when the story passed between them. One older co-worker shared something that unsettled him further. The dead don't always appear to everyone, he said. Sometimes they choose their witness. Sometimes they follow a family. My father didn't want to believe that, but the thought gnawed at him, especially after what had already happened to me in the mall, with the mannequin that turned its head. Could it be more than coincidence? Could the night itself have marked us, binding our family to its unfinished stories? He tried to pray. He lit candles in the small altar my mother kept, whispered the rosary through lips that trembled. But even prayer gave him little peace. The church had always spoken of las animas del purgatorio, souls caught between heaven and hell, begging for prayers to ease their suffering. What if this was one of them? What if it had turned its hollow eyes on him to demand remembrance, to demand that someone see? The following week he filed for retirement, no explanation beyond health reasons. We knew better. He could not spend another night in that place, not with the road stretching like an open wound behind the junkyard, not with the certainty that if he looked again, the eyeless man would still be there, waiting. Yet despite his escape, the image never left him. Even years later, when he told me the story, his hands trembled. His voice dropped to a whisper as though the figure might still hear him if he spoke too loudly. I asked him once what terrified him most, that the thing he saw had been real or that it had not. He did not answer. He only looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Son, the worst fear is when the night proves it remembers you. Not all the stories belong to me or my father. Some linger in the voices of others carried like heirlooms passed from mouth to mouth. This one was told to me by my grandfather, though even in his old age his voice shook when he recounted it. After retiring from his work as a school teacher, he found himself restless and short on money. To make ends meet, he agreed to cover night shifts now and then for a depot of combis, those small battered microbuses that rattle through every Latin American city. The job was simple: guard the depot after dark, make sure no one broke in, and keep watch until the first drivers returned in the morning. The depot itself was little more than a large fenced lot. Corrugated metal sheets rose high around its perimeter, trapping the cold inside. At the gate stood a small shack where the night watchman could sit. And beyond that, row after row of idle combis stretched into the shadows. At night, the place felt abandoned by the living world. Only a couple of weak lamps threw pale circles on the dirt, and to keep warm, the guards often lit a fire in a makeshift barrel. My grandfather's first night there was uneventful until just before midnight. The last driver rolled in, parked his microbus at the far end of the lot, and came over to chat for a few minutes. They spoke of ordinary things: the chill, the price of fuel, the politics of the day. Then the man wished him luck, climbed into his own car, and drove away, leaving my grandfather alone. Silence thickened around him. The fire crackled, the wind rattled the tin fence, but otherwise the depot was still. He turned toward the rows of microbuses, their windows reflecting the orange glow of the flames. And that was when he saw her. In the penultimate seat of one of the parked combis, a woman sat quietly. Her hair was long and white, spilling over her shoulders like threads of frost. Her head tilted slightly to one side as though she were waiting for someone, or perhaps asleep. My grandfather's heart stumbled in his chest. He thought at first that a passenger had been forgotten. Maybe she had dozed off and missed her stop. Or worse, maybe someone with darker intentions had slipped inside. Without thinking, he bolted toward the exit, waving down the driver who had just left. He caught him just before the man pulled away in his car. "There's someone in the microbus," my grandfather said, breathless. "A woman in the back seat. Come help me get her out." The driver looked at him with a strange calm, not surprise, not alarm, almost pity. "Don't worry, Don," he said. "I know who you saw. She won't harm you, just don't look at her too long, leave her be." And with that, the driver left, as if what he had said explained everything. My grandfather stood there bewildered, clutching his coat tighter against the cold. He returned to his fire, though the warmth now did little to comfort him. He tried not to glance at the microbus, tried to believe that the driver's words had been nonsense. But the temptation gnawed at him. Minutes crawled by like hours. Finally, unable to resist, he raised his eyes. She was still there. Only this time, she was no longer looking at the floor. Her face was turned toward him, and her eyes, black and gleaming, caught the firelight like the eyes of an animal in the dark. Fixed, unblinking, locked on his. A coldness spread through his body so sharp he thought his heart might give out. He staggered back, fumbling for his medicine, then fled to the gate. He spent the rest of the night there, wrapped in a blanket, trembling harder from terror than from the cold. He did not dare look back again. At dawn, when the first drivers returned, my grandfather wasted no time. Pale and shivering, he told them everything. The woman in the seat, the way she had turned her gaze on him, those eyes glinting like coals in the dark. The men listened without shock. They nodded as though hearing of an old acquaintance. One of them clapped him gently on the shoulder and said, "So, you've seen her already. First night, too. That's how it usually goes." They gathered around the fire and told him the truth, or at least the truth as they understood it. Years ago, the woman had been a passenger on that very route. She was old, exhausted from a lifetime of work, and she boarded the combi one late afternoon to return home. She sat at the back, placed her bags on the floor, and closed her eyes. But she never opened them again. The driver finished his route, stopping again and again, passengers coming and going, until the combi was empty, except for her. When he reached the depot that night, he found her still there, her skin already cold, her life extinguished sometime between the bustling streets and the final stop. No one had noticed. Not a single soul. Since then, they said, she lingered. Some nights she could be seen, small and frail in the shadows of the parked combis, waiting for the ride that would finally take her home. She was not cruel, not vengeful. She simply remained. A presence overlooked in life, overlooked in death, still unclaimed. My grandfather thought of her eyes then, the way they caught the glow of the fire, reflecting it back at him. He wondered if she was pleading, if those burning eyes were not meant to harm but to be remembered, to be acknowledged at last. By the depot gate, beside the shack where the watchmen sat their vigils, stood a small altar. He hadn't noticed it before, half hidden beneath withered flowers and melted wax. Now he understood. It belonged to her. The drivers left candles there, sometimes flowers, sometimes a prayer, a gesture to keep her spirit at peace, to tell her she was not forgotten. That morning, one of the younger men lit a candle, placed it carefully on the altar, and whispered a brief Padre Nuestro. The smoke curled into the brightening sky, fragile and gray. My grandfather felt a lump rise in his throat. For the first time since the night's terror, warmth touched him again. Not from the fire, but from the recognition that the woman's story had not vanished. She was remembered here. Yet the memory did not release him. Even years later, when he recounted that night, his eyes would shift unconsciously toward the nearest window, as though expecting to find her still there, watching. He admitted that sometimes on sleepless nights he could almost see the outline of her silhouette against the dark, head tilted, hair spilling forward, waiting. People say ghosts frighten because they threaten us, but my grandfather said the opposite. This woman terrified him because she never threatened, never moved, never demanded. She simply endured, and there is nothing more haunting than a soul too tired to leave. When I look back at these stories, the mannequin in the mall, the eyeless man on the dirt road, the woman waiting in the combi, they seem different on the surface. One took place in the polished corridors of commerce, another in a wasteland of rusting machines, and the last in the tired depot of public transport. Yet beneath their details, they echo one another with unsettling precision. Each one ends with a gaze. The mannequin that should have been blind but turned its head to acknowledge me. The man without eyes, hollow sockets, still somehow seeing my father in the dark. The woman whose tired stare followed my grandfather, lit by fire as though demanding recognition. To live as a watchman is to believe you are the observer, the guardian of property, the silent witness while others sleep. But the truth, as these stories remind me, is more dangerous. Sometimes it is not we who watch the night, but the night that watches us. Folklore has always whispered this warning. My grandmother said the hours after midnight belong not to men but to wandering souls. In churches, priests teach that las animas still hunger for prayers, for candles, for the small kindness of remembrance. In anthropology, scholars speak of liminal spaces, thresholds where the living and the dead brush shoulders. And in psychology, doctors point out how exhaustion blurs perception, how shadows and silence invite the brain to weave terrors out of emptiness. But explanations don't erase what we felt. They don't erase the weight of a gaze that should not exist. I think often of the altars I have seen scattered through the city, candles on a street corner for a victim of violence, plastic flowers tied to a post where a driver died, faded photos beneath rain-streaked glass. They are not just memorials, they are barriers, offerings, ways of saying, "We see you, we remember you, you are not alone anymore." Without them, perhaps the dead remain restless, compelled to return again and again to the places where they were ignored. When I left my job as a night guard, I thought I had escaped the worst of it. But the stories follow me. I carry them in my bloodline. My father, my grandfather, myself. Sometimes when I wake at 3 in the morning and glance toward the window, I imagine something waiting there in the dark, not hostile, not kind, simply watching. And I cannot help but ask who truly keeps vigil in the night. The men with their flashlights and radios, or the forgotten souls who turn their heads, who walk without eyes, who sit endlessly in the last seat of the bus. I no longer claim to know the answer. I only know this. I left the night, but the night has never left me.